Gentlemen, I must tell you that I've been looking forward to this conversation the whole week. And the reason for that is I want you to demystify for us what digital ID is. So, audience, I'm absolutely delighted and privileged to have with us today Gerard Cronje. He's one of the most humble souls I've met. So he won't tell you that he heads up the digital ID program for the PIM, but that's who he is. I also trust that in the Saab, when we talk about the Saab being very cyber secure, he is the gentleman that has made that happen for us over the last many, many years. So Gerard, warm welcome. Mason probably needs no introduction to South Africa. He is the co-founder of Law Trust. He is Mr. Digital ID. When he starts to talk to me about things like PKI and security keys and HSMs and so on, I get a bit lost. But indeed, he is an international expert, and really, Mason, we're delighted to have you here. So this is going to be very dynamic, not as controversial as some of the other panels, I think, but I want to kick off immediately and spend as much time extracting knowledge from you guys. And I'm going to start off with a question that I really enjoy asking up front, okay, which is, my God, the first time I heard of digital financial ID, or digital ID, let's start, digital ID, I thought, what the hell is this? Is it biometric or is it something else? Okay, can you explain it so that at least my grandma can understand it as well? Over to you, Gerard.
Stuff. Thank you, Arif, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you guys today. I don't know if I'm going to meet the brief necessarily, but we'll try. I'll try and lay down a couple of just key concepts quickly.
Of course.
And I think it will aid us in discussion, but also position it a little bit. So no offense to Omas out there, but we'll see if we can make it real, and then hopefully Mason can also connect the dots for us around what it practically means.
Fantastic.
So I'm also struck by Vicky's comments a little earlier around stuffy suits and so on. So hopefully the answers won't be of that nature. And then Marius Oosthuizen yesterday mentioned that if you think digital identity is face recognition or biometrics, then you're still in 1993. So hopefully we've moved on from there. But I think the first concept around what identity is first identifier idea. All right, so the fact that I can digitally identify you. And there's a couple of approaches there. We saw the world coin idea, this idea of capturing your biometric into a blockchain that then uniquely identifies you for future transacting. We know about the self-sovereign idea. So in other words, I decide myself what that unique identifier is, and then I start to latch things onto it. And then there's this idea of identifying in terms of your national identity. All right, so in other words, there's some sort of authoritative source, central database that says you are X, and we build on top of that. So that's the idea around identify, and we've kind of picked a hybrid approach across those methods, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But that's the first aspect of digital identity, is unique identification. Right. The second idea is attributes, so all the stuff about me, or all the stuff I own and how it links to me. So age and so on. So that's the second concept when you think about digital identity, is the stuff about me or the stuff I own, and how does that link to me. And then this is going to help us a little in the terminology as we go. You can take a set of those things and stick it in a credential. Now what a credential in essence is a way of me digitally representing something about me that you can verify. That's it, pretty straightforward. It can do anything from confirming some of the attributes we just spoke about, to actually confirming my identity as well. FIDO tokens, things like that. So if you get those three concepts in your head, that's digital identity. The piece we're probably not going to explore a lot today, and it gets a little more into Marius's metaverse and things like that, is this idea of behavioral data. So when we talk digital identity, we think digital footprint and what have I done, and that becomes very relevant in fraud management and payment ecosystems and so on, but we'll see how much we sort of pivot from digital identity into those concepts. So maybe just the three I just mentioned. What is digital identity? Well, it's something that identifies you, it's stuff about you, your attributes, and then how do you present those in the form of credentials that other people can know that either of those two things are true.
Fantastic, fantastic. Mason, I'm a bit doff. Make it even simpler for me.
I did have a chuckle when you did the intros and you said Gerard is one of the most humble personalities. I note you didn't say the same about me, so thank you very much for that. But I think, this identity is this fascinating emotional topic as well, and you see it in some of the first world countries, and I know you said we mustn't mention names, but one of the first world countries where they're almost having riots because they're about to roll out a national identity again.
Right.
So it's such an interesting thing, but it's so topical today because the identity is yours, for sure, but the ability to use your identity with the digital systems that we have all over, that is the essence of what we're talking about,
Right.
Because that guarantees you your rights, and it guarantees you your services, and it guarantees you your link to your money at the end of the day. So I think that's a very important connection to make. One of the best ways to illustrate what is identity is to look at why we need it. We watch the press, we see these new scams that are out there, like Arab Engineering that was taken with probably the first deep fake video call where a chief financial officer instructed a financial manager to make a $25 million payment or a few of them, and who would say no if you're seeing the person? And that illustrates the point is the world has changed in the last 2 years. We have to have a non-novel, cryptographically verifiable identity that we can use in day-to-day life if we want to make things better,
Yep. And I guess as we move into more and more into the digital economy, having a digital ID is actually quite fundamental. The way that I think about it is that, my goodness, the way that I would normally identify myself in a financial transaction is through my card and my PIN or a password, and something. And what you guys are saying is, if I understand you correctly, that there are particular firstly, it has to be unique. Secondly, there's particular attributes. Could be my name, my surname, my mobile number, and so on. And then the important bit is that you're saying, well, I'm not just going to keep this thing for the sake of keeping it, but the ability to transact is what makes it really important. The reason why you need this particular thing. So let me turn then and ask, because in the PEM language, we don't just say digital ID, right? We say digital financial ID. So what the hell is the difference? Gerrit?
Yeah, so the way we define it, and we got some textbook definitions that we had a go at, but it's really those attributes that are specific to your operation in the financial area. All right, and how do we group those together? So it could be the control of credentials within the financial ecosystem, that we're able to exchange those and verify those. But one of the key concepts, and I'll let Mason sort of expand on that, we do have taken or we are setting a direction where we got this idea of foundational ID that's still linked or embedded in your national ID. So we're trying to connect the dots. And then we're saying, right, so build on top of this national ID idea and then do whatever we need to do for the financial operations. And we're obviously quite laser focused on getting the PEM side of that going first. But there is no doubt whatever work we do will spill over into market operations, into credit extension, and we're probably going to get there in some way or fashion today into fraud prevention, et cetera, that is outside or more than just payment systems.
Got you. Mason?
And maybe if you allow me, let's just go back a little bit in the history of identity in our country. Because it's not a new thing for us. We're one of the first countries that had a proper register of who are citizens, who are not, who's coming into the country. We've had various initiatives around capturing biometrics, back capturing, all the fingerprint records. Home Affairs doing a lot of good news stuff as well in bringing face matching and all of these things into play. But I think really there's after looking at all the different countries and all the models, there's a simple recipe for success for a country to approach this, and it's as easy as A, B, C, D.
Right.
But it's what those things mean that is important. A stands for adoption.
Right.
And that is the most important thing. And I think sometimes in the past we've lost sight of that. Is adoption is the key element. So ease of use drives adoption. We all know that from the payment space as well. But it's the same at a country level when we're doing these things. So we have to make sure when we're approaching identity that there is adoption. And in some cases you have to help out adoption with some regulation as well, because the cats want to run in a different direction.
Right.
But following closely from that, the adoption is, the B stands for benefits, is we've got to be really clear about how the citizen is going to benefit, how the organization, I like the phrases, payment service providers are going to benefit, and how the country is going to benefit as well. So we're going to be super clear about these things. That's the B. And in fact, we need to set KPIs for ourselves that are achievable. And KPI number 1 is adoption.
Right.
It's not about getting out a digital financial ID. Then we're doing the same things that we did in the past. It's about being able to use it for the first time. That is what we would see as a win. C is for control. So not always a popular topic, but we have to make sure that this is governed. We have to make sure other countries can understand what we're doing, hence the PKI, the governance, those kind of things. We've got to look after our sovereign security. We've got to make sure that there's no vendor lock-in. We're not doing these things so we can make one vendor R1 billion. That's not like that. The idea is to stimulate an ecosystem. So there's got to be elements of control in there as well. And then finally, we've got this new opportunity to look at design. There are new technologies, there's new standards. A lot of these things we have been able to learn from Europe. Not that I'm in love with Europe, but at the end of the day, there are a whole lot of countries that are forced to interoperate. They're not each country is not doing their own thing, so they have to have intellectual debates on regulations and laws and technical standards, so there's a lot we don't have to repeat. So that design is very important, and then we tie back again into adoption. We've also got this opportunity to give the power to the consumer, where they can choose who do they want to show an identity to, who do they want to prove their bank account to, do they want to give away their ID number if they've got to prove they're old enough to apply for a loan. That kind of control we can bring in as well. And that is all part of what we are looking at now for the country.
Fantastic. I love the gimmicks and the acronyms. I really do. So ABCD works very well for me. It keeps it pretty.
Even I can remember that.
Absolutely. So there are a ton of questions that are coming in, and some of them link to the framework of ABCD. So I'm going to pick one or two, and then we dialogue around it. Let me go for a question from Mr. Steve. And he's saying, well, great guys, but how will digital ID help bridge the gaps for the unbanked in particular, and especially those in, let's call it the rural or informal sectors? How do you think about this? Maybe Mason, and then I come back to Gerard. Yep.
So I see this very much as an evolution, not a revolution.
Right.
So while we are focused on adoption and the KPI of being able to use this, I don't think we are going to try and hit all 100% of the population at one stage. It is going to evolve. So I think one of the things that we want to do is be able to work with tools that people have in their hands.
Right.
We know everybody's got a phone. People, if you're like me, you love using your phone to make payments and things, but I think everybody will enjoy that because it is, at the end of the day, it's a secure calculating device that you have with you. Again, there are some of the very older ones that maybe can't have all the functions right now, but generally, if we're looking at it, so the versions of Android that are out there, most of the people actually have got this form of communication, and it can be a secure repository for something like a digital identity. So we're looking at how we can get 80% fit outside there.
Yep.
We're looking at how we can get to the merchants, especially the small informal ones that also have this technology. If we can just get to them, we're already changing the whole country. So I think it's an evolution, not a revolution, but as Pradeep said this morning, it's going to be a fast evolution. We want to learn, we want to improve, we want to keep on going in that cycle.
Excellent. Gerard, is there anything particular then again from an unbanked community, folks in the rural areas, that you guys are thinking about in the design? Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe just to build on top of that, the first point is if we get it right for the latest Samsung and iPhone devices, then we did it wrong.
Right.
All right, so that's point number one.
Right.
Point number two, we're also having a bit of a discussion on whether or not there isn't a physical card component to this. So that's an interesting discussion for that enablement. Pradeep was mentioning pay by fingerprint or pay by face, etc. For those technologies, you can only rely on the biometrics, but we would love to have this credential idea on top of that. So the debate around cards, some sort of physical thing that links into this ability to present credentials, makes it a lot more real, a lot quicker access, things like that. And therefore, we are really having discussions around interoperable standards, really enabling low-end devices. We're doing some interesting things around thinking around offline transacting, the connectivity problem. So we are thinking cheap devices, connectivity problem, and even no device. How do we approach that?
Right. I feel like a kid in a candy store because there's
Yeah.
so many questions that are coming through, and I'm wanting to tap into various dimensions. But let me return to maybe a set that I had in my mind. You know, I often think of digital ID and so on. I say this is government's problem; they must solve for it. Why is the SARB driving this, Gerard?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I think maybe let's just stand still on the driving bit, because in a certain context, we're a participant, all right? So we are really part of this national digitization program, and now we're thinking about identity and so on. And for that, we want to get sort of the rules of the game right, that we can all interoperate and so on. We are also a catalyst, right? We're trying, I know a lot of the sectors are doing things like the mobile network operators, etc. So we play that role as well. Catalyst, connecting the dots, trying to put us forward in one direction. And then in the third context, we are kind of a driver for the payment ecosystem, financial thinking, and so on. And we're trying to pull all three of those roles together and play in the right way. And because we're talking national utility, because we're getting that sort of mindset on top, I think we are uniquely positioned to think greater good. And we are quite well positioned to at least bring the financial thinking and at very least the payments thinking along into this ecosystem. So that's kind of the idea, is it's not trying to drive everything, but it's across those three roles. So participant, catalyst, and then also driving as well. And I think, like I said, I think we're quite uniquely placed to be able to wear all three of those hats.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've also heard many times from folks in the SARB, including Pradeep, also talk about digital public infrastructure and why SARB needs to come to the party, similar to other countries where central banks have taken a lead to build this digital public infrastructure. Would you agree with the comments that Gerard has made, Mason?
Very definitely. You know, the SARB is relatively unique position to understand governance and technology ending in a financial result, you know, and that's not always the same with all the stakeholders in government, you know, so that itself creates an impetus to do something quickly and to do it right, you know, I think so that's very important to remember that. I think in a lot of the cases, you know, somebody needs to get something out there, you know, right now, before there is too much fragmentation. At the end of the day, this is also an international play for us, you know, so we have to make sure we revisit things like the national PKI infrastructure again to be sure that it services the needs that we have in payments, but also at a juristic level. You know, we're not just talking about people now, we're talking about the companies that need this kind of identity as well. And then we all need to do that in a governed way so we can show the rest of the world that we're doing solid, reliable things. And then we've got these little inconveniences coming in like quantum computers and post-quantum crypto, and we've got to make sure we're putting a structure in place that can handle that coming as well. You know, so agile for us is definitely the way to go. It's going to be evolutionary, we're going to be learning, we're going to be changing and improving, as opposed to build once and then that's how it is for the next 50 years.
Right. Right, so iteratively, as you learn, as you design, as you test use cases, let's dig a bit deeper. Okay, so we've warmed up. We're comfortable. Yeah. Let's dig a bit deeper. And I'm going to pick a few questions that talk to some of the framework elements that you guys have mentioned. Let me start with Vicky. Vicky says, and it's probably a planted question in some way, because it talks about the adoption and it talks about the benefits that you mentioned. And Vicky's question is, well, will a well-crafted digital financial ID that is used consistently across the ecosystem provide relief across the broader financial ecosystem? Example, onboarding, customer information, risk screening, fraud detection, etc. Vicky is almost answering it, but right. But are those the type of benefits? Today, banks largely, and I'm just picking banks, largely have their systems. What would the motivation be to move from what they've got to digital financial ID? Okay, Gerard, then Mason. Yep.
So a couple of thoughts in that. I think the payment ecosystem discussion is very interesting because there's that weakest link concept, right? And not to be disparaging around new entrants and so on, and we heard some of the panels today, you know, Don't put the fintechs down. They're not looking to introduce risk, etc. But if we want a trusted ecosystem, there's got to be minimum rules of the game.
Right.
All right, and digital identity has certainly got the ability, at least for those entry points, exactly, for KYC, for verification, for things like that, to establish those minimum rules of entering this trust ecosystem. So that's its beauty. And if you create that trust, because that's what it's about, if you create that trust for payments, then you essentially are creating it for all kinds of other functions. We, for instance, had some interaction with some of the mobile network operator and role players in this space and so on, and they're fighting the RICA fight, right? And trying to create trust in that environment. And if you can spill that trust over, if you can interconnect it, if we can all conform to the same rules of the game, have similar standards, then there's actually room for innovation. So what we're not trying to do is take activity and responsibility away. We're trying to do it in such a way where we can share collectively around everybody's efforts. So it becomes the sum of all the parts in terms of the benefit we get in this ecosystem. So those two things around the ecosystem, weakest link, share the benefits so we become stronger. That would be the idea, and she's picked the example spot on around the KYC verification debate, etc. Yeah.
Fantastic. Mason, you want to add to that?
Put a picture in your mind. When last did you go and apply for something where you didn't have to give a copy of your ID card? I mean, we've got this fantastic ID card. It's got a chip in, all of these things, but the practice outside there is let's make a copy of it. Let's get 3 months of bank statements. I've spent 4 years now traveling around the world, just experiencing the different businesses, financial systems, how they're working inside there. I've never filled in more paperwork in my life than in this age of digitalization, So if we do this and we get the right foundation, we will be in an area where there can be less information at risk, in fact, and less danger to your personal information, which is a great win for us as individuals as well. But it's going to make things cheaper, quicker, cheaper, less mistakes, more secure.
So you certainly see a business case for both, for many players, banks, fintechs, MNOs, and so on. And one question that's come through, which is quite an interesting one, it says, will DFID be optional, or when I turn 16, similar to a national ID card, I got to get this? Is there an age limit to this particular thing? When do I get this? Will you make it mandatory if I read the question correctly? Mason? And then
No, that's a Saab question. I'm going to keep quiet.
Good. So I certainly don't want to communicate policy stances from the stage in any way at this stage. But the short answer is, if we're thinking ecosystem, there is probably a mandatory component for entering that ecosystem that we're going to have a good look at. So in other words, if we want to do the weakest link thing, then you have to mandate some of it. So in other words, will you be forced to use the specific payment rails that might enforce the rule? No, you're not. You can still stay on cash. You can still stay on the other rails, etc. But are we looking for kind of minimum entry requirements, and you meeting certain requirements around DFID for entry into this trusted ecosystem? I think it only makes sense. We'll still speak to our policy-making colleagues as we go down this road, but it only makes sense.
So again, let's dig a bit deeper. Help me understand how one would design this particular system, right? You mentioned attributes and verifiable credentials and PKI infrastructure. Just make it simple for me. What are the key components to the design? And it could be at any level: infrastructure, trust, regulatory frameworks. Give us a sense of how you see this coming together.
No, you can't make it simple.
You can't make it simple. Go for it.
No, joke. So I'll start, but I think it's let's just free form this, So I think the first thing, and for me the most important one, is it's not just about the tech, it's about the trust in this ecosystem that we're building. So immediately we say that there's a governance element to that as well.
Right.
Definitely technology, and there's some minimum standards that we want to put in place, because the world is changing, and it is going to affect us. I don't think it's quite as dramatic as a lot of people are making out. There's not going to be a quantum day and all our financial systems will be broken. This is a red flag to say, let's do good housekeeping, and when we got this opportunity to design something new, let's make sure we are designing in crypto agility into the identity that payments are going to rely on as well. So a lot of the stuff, we got this opportunity to actually take trust, relook at the governance that we require in order to make countries trust each other, as well as the individuals that are going to be adopting the system, and then we make sure the guidelines around crypto is ready as well. PKI, blockchain, PKI, all of these things, at the end of the day, we need some element that is not novel. The novelty and the innovation is going to come potentially at other payment products and the way you're approaching the market. That's not what we are worried about. At the bottom line, we need something that is technology sound, something that we can explain and prove in court, and that we can rely on. And PKI has got this opportunity to have governance associated with it, the trust model for all of this as well, which is why we're looking at a base of public key infrastructure that the world understands and relies on, and then we're building on top of that, Gerrit.
I think that's brilliant. And so I chucked in an acronym which I figured is apt to use here as well. So we mustn't commit any sins in the design, right? So if you think about sin, we must retain the subject control idea.
Right.
So that's absolutely critical. So this idea of wallet, self-presented, things like that. So that's the S part. International alignment. We are not an island. We need to think about interoperate standards, things like that. So however we design it, we must do that. And we've made some great strides in that space, I think. And then the last one is nationwide collaboration. So this whole ecosystem idea. So if we don't commit any of those sins and that we forget about those things in our design, we should be okay. So subject control, international alignment, and national collaboration.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So tell me then, you mentioned the international component. What lessons can we learn from those other jurisdictions, Mason, who've done this, maybe had some scars? Are there big lessons that we can take out?
I think the biggest lesson for me is the ones that are working are the ones that evolve. So the second you cast something in concrete in this space, you've got a problem. Let's look at Europe, for example. It started with United Nations model law in this area.
Right.
Eventually ended up in EIDAS, but Europe is regulatory heavy, but at least they looked at it and they started looking, why is this still not helping people do cross-border transactions, registration for a bank account in a different country? What is the missing thing? And they've evolved and they've come out with EIDAS 2 now, which introduces some new services, but at the end of the day, it's taking away some of the regulatory stumbling blocks to make sure that everybody can use this. So I think being open to evolve and not saying, we're going to be doing this once, it's our way, nobody else's way. I think that's one of the most important things that we've learned across the world. The second thing is we've got to be careful who we listen to out there. So there's some fantastic things happening in countries where there's 2 million people. That's not the same as here. There's fantastic things happening in countries where there's over 1 billion people. It's not the same as here.
Right.
They've got such a strong internal market. They're quite internal. South Africa, we've got a big and a complex system, but we also want to work with the rest of Africa. So it's very interesting that we are learning from them. We're going to evolve what we're busy doing. So we're taking the best of what they've done, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel, so we stay interoperable, but we need to move quite quickly.
Excellent. You want to add to that, Gerrit?
Yeah, maybe some of the key lessons, and to build on this sort of evolving thing. If you look at the people that started this journey a long time ago, and you can attach your own countries to that, they really started from quite a centralized control model, and they've kind of shifted into the subject control identity and so on. So that's one of the lessons one can think about. One of the other lessons we can think about is if you do fast payments, it leads to faster fraud. So if you try and catch up after the fact, you got a problem. So when you start the new ecosystem, the new thinking, you better start clean. I think we can really learn that lesson. And then other jurisdictions that started kind of with not offering or pushing the value that digital identity gives you, but already started with how do we govern it, what laws do we make, etc. And that only stirs people's fears around central management and government control, and then you get activist groups, and you don't want to start there. The point of digital identity is to deliver the value. So in other words, when you market this thing, we're not necessarily, and I mean, it's going to be up to this room to market it, but I don't think you're going to market digital identity. You're going to market the ability to pay by face, to be interoperable, to be fraud-free, to be able to verify people, etc. It's not about the identity. It's about what it gives you.
Yeah, I want to build on this particular one because I see it coming out like, especially in the digital euro conversation and the, in the UK we're considering CBDC. I think more than 50% of the questions were on privacy and
Yeah.
protecting privacy. So, some folks may say, as you pointed out, that this is the way government will control everything. How would you respond to that?
Yeah. So there's the heart of our hybrid approach, all right? So we want to, by design, try and get this animal right. Okay, so you have a nice balance because you do need authoritative role players, all right? You have one determiner from a legal South African identity. You have one overseer for the payments ecosystem. You have a central source of authoritative data around companies and the registered directors and things like that. So that's the one side of the coin, and we're combining it with a subject control idea. So in other words, yes, it comes from an authoritative source. Yes, we can trust each other, etc. But we give it in your hands, around
right.
how you share it. All right, and I think that's the nice combination to combat that question around, are we building a central surveillance database? No, we are not. On the fraud side, there's an interesting discussion around blacklisting people or potentially marking fraudsters, etc. You can't get away with some of those central controls, but that is not inherent to the DFID design. That is for us thinking about how do we do fraud information sharing, how do we make sure the ecosystem stays clean, etc. But that'll be the main response. It's really that subject control idea in this hybrid model by keeping authority still in the right place.
And if I'm in control, and I'm going back to the issue of being, someone who might come from a community where I just have not a smartphone, a feature phone, right? Would you accommodate for those users?
The feature phone one is interesting. That you're probably going to go down to some sort of physical element, right? Or some sort of web-hosted identity, and we're playing with both those concepts to figure that out. So no device is a bit tricky, and we're speculating around what the right solution is. But some capable device, and this is really even the tax exempt under 2,000 Rand devices and so on, we're really looking to cater for all those in the way we design this animal. Yeah.
There's such a rich set of questions. If it's okay, we don't have a lot of time. We've got about 7 minutes left, but there's such a rich set of questions. I'm just going to put some of them out there to both of you, and maybe we could do a rapid fire for the last, 5 or 6 minutes. So this is from Lebone. What about those with no IDs, no birth certificates, who are most likely to be unbanked? How do you get them included? You want to go first, Mason?
It sounds suspiciously like a Home Affairs question, that. But, at the end of the day, we need to have a registry of all the citizens in the country, and we need to know all the visitors in the country. So at a country level, we need to do that. I think that is where this collaboration effort with the SARB and with DHA and with SARS and Treasury and Department of Transport, all of that, and the presidency, all of that is driving towards getting something there that is useful, because everybody needs to be onboarded onto the central system, but the central identity system doesn't have to work in a central manner, and that's really what we are focusing on, is designing something that's going to be practically useful in payments. I just want to touch on the previous one, is the question about the feature phones as well, is these things don't roll out overnight. And I'll bet you now that by the time, we would love things to go really quickly, but in 2 years' time, feature phones are going to look very different to what they do now. More and more people have got these low-cost but effective smartphones, which are penetrating. And in 5 years' time, it's going to be a very different picture again. So we don't have to worry about that too much, because it is going to take time to filter through.
Absolutely. One of the big things that I'm taking out from this dialogue is that trust is embedded from the middle, from a governance structure perspective, standards, the ability to ensure that you know that you're dealing with the right attributes and so on. But ownership is distributed. That's what you're saying.
Correct.
Right? And that's fantastic. I want to come back to the trust element. And one question is, Pradeep talked a lot about trust earlier.
Yeah.
What is the approach to educate and build trust? Okay? People associated with Home Affairs who have, from this person's perspective, over time lost some trust. How would you respond to that? Yeah. So the education and the building the trust component, is that part of what you would do in the PIM?
Absolutely, and even part of what we're thinking about in terms of DFID. So there's three specific streams, and they all three very substantial in what we're trying to do, and they need to work together. The one is the technical solutioning, standards development, cooperation, things like that. So the technical side. There's the trust framework side, and I usually draw this as a Venn diagram, but sort of the trust, the ecosystem, the rules of the game around trust, we call it trust framework, and then we got a component we call go-to-market strategy. So it lacks exactly this idea about getting people to perceive it right and so on, but it's also the area where we're going to need the help of the people in this room. So that's kind of the point. The SARP will certainly do what it can, but it's not going to be the one that ultimately puts the products in the consumer's hands. So that last mile, conversation, education, repositioning, trust establishment, we're going to have to do as a community together. I think that's because there's no easy answers on that one. That's what we're going to have to do. And one of other remarks that Pradeep made earlier, we establish trust by actually delivering, right? Actually doing.
Yep. So. Absolutely. I'm going to keep firing away questions if that's okay. Try to cram in as much as I can in 3 minutes. This is an important one. Please elaborate on the thinking of a PayShap ID in comparison to a digital ID. Okay, will we see convergence in terms of the strategy? One of you want to take it?
Go for it.
Well, that's kind of the same question of, or just a lower level of the digital financial ID versus the national identity, etc. And what we're trying to build is kind of a chain of trust going through this whole model, where you can apply individual rules on top of it. So whether or not we're going to need a specific channel or payment channel credential is going to be dependent on whether or not you need to do extra stuff that wasn't done by the layer below. So in other words, if we get it right for your financial ID verification zone, we don't need to redo it per payment channel. But if there's extra credentials, extra things you need to verify, etc., then you might very well build another chain on top of that. And electronically, we're hoping to make this non-confusing to the man in the street. So hopefully we get the fragmentation problem right by all us collaborating that you don't have that. And you can certainly hide the complexity from the user, that he doesn't have to figure out, okay, now which card do I need to figure out or digital for which verification. You can hide the complexity, but practically that's the point. Is as you build the layers on trust, if there is additional checks, then yes, you have another layer of identity sitting on top of that. Similar to the way every participant in this room will also have stuff that's particular to their constituents, like who's the authority to determine that somebody owns a store of value, a bank account, etc. It's the authority that gave him that account. So we're all going to be issuers, we're all going to be verifiers, we are in this together, and we're going to build trust on top of each other.
I like it. We've got about a minute left. Hashtag hide the complexity. I like it in the design. 2 more questions, and then I'm sure people could trouble you over the break and ask many more questions. One's a little bit more visionary. Is there room for a medical ID as we're doing this work?
Yeah, so I mean, doesn't have to only be one, it's exactly what we're saying now, is there's different attributes related to these things, and there's different sources of truth, so I think having a national ID makes it easier to have a digital financial ID. Having a national ID makes it easier to have a medical ID potentially.
Right.
A lovely example, which is one of the demos that we are focusing on, non-payments related, but it is issuing a credential from an optometrist to say you've had your eye test, and that's sitting in a wallet on your phone where you can make it visual as well. That's a powerful tool we have, and you can use that to digitally apply for your mobile driver's license, when that comes. What a beautiful scenario. And I think we're going to find there's going to be a lot of innovation and a lot of entrepreneurs that are going to think up things that they can build on top of this standards-based interoperable framework.
I'm going to finish off with a quote from Pradeep. Action speaks louder than words. Where would you like us to be in 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months from now? Mason, and then I'll finish with Gerard.
I don't think we're allowed to say anything different except we want to pay a car guard. What did he say? We want to pay a car guard. You want to see in a non-suit kind of environment, you want to see somebody doing a transaction where they are safe and they're enjoying the experience. That is what we would love to see.
So let's maybe try and face the question head on, and we'll see where we land. And if you're going to quote me in a year from now, we'll see how good
Fine.
it was.
Yep.
But for the next 3 months, we're really envisaging this idea of getting a national collaboration going and a singular vision and things like that. So we're driving something we call a friends and family POC. So in other words, illustrate the technology, talk about it, talk about who's doing what, which layer, etc. So we're at least nationally aligned. So that's what I would love to see in 3 months. In 6 months, I would like to see us as a payment sector start to align our thinking and how do these credentials fit and what does it mean and am I an issuer and so on. And I know we've suspended some of those workshops, but they're coming soon. That's what I'd like to see in the 6-month period for us to kind of have a shared vision and clarity around how it potentially could work for the payment ecosystem. And then when you talk a year to 2 years from now, some actual implementation and user value. So that would be my wish at this stage and certainly what we're driving towards.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, we are out of time. You've given me enough to go back and have a dialogue with my grandma. I think I can explain many things, including where we desire to be in 3, 6, and 12 months. Without further ado, I don't want to keep you from lunch. Give these gentlemen a round of applause. Thank you very much.